Yeah.
So that's one thing I often coach actors too is don't be focused on the facial expressions or the mannerisms of the cast character. Your focus should be on the character in your head, not in your head, but focusing on the character and delivering that. Right? And then as soon as the audition is over, thank them and leave the room.
Yeah. Get out. Get out.
Yeah, this is not a time to converse about your day. Even
Right.
if you know the people in the room, they're on the schedule.
Yep. Respect their time. That was the voice of talent agent and performance psychologist, Dr. Albert Bramante, and it is my absolute delight to have him on as the guest of this episode of the Page and Stage podcast, where we explore the art and craft of writing and performance. As always, I'm your host, Jason Cannon, and this week we dig deep into the nuts and bolts of casting and talent agents. Albert and I talk about why actors self-sabotage, how to play the long game when it comes to getting representation, and how to reframe rejection as a force for positive growth. But before we get to all that, a brief Page and Stage plug. This podcast is only one part of my story coaching work. You can check out everything I'm up to over at pageandstage.art, including my other podcast, 100 Plays, a storytelling resources page, archives of all my previous podcast episodes, my own books and plays, and my weekly newsletter full of tips, tricks, inspiration, and encouragement for storytellers of all stripes. You can sign up for free and get the newsletter directly into your inbox each Friday, as well as every new podcast episode right into your inbox every Monday. Everything is free, but if you find value in all this storytelling content, you can financially support me at pageandstage.art or forward any of the newsletters or podcasts to other story-loving friends, or hire me outright as your personal story coach. So if you're working on a memoir, play, or speech, I cannot wait to hear your story. Now, let me tell you a bit more about my awesome guest, Albert Bramante. Dr. Al is a talent agent, performance psychologist, and mindset expert who has spent over 20 years helping high performers, both in the entertainment industry and beyond, conquer their mental roadblocks. He holds a PhD in psychology and certifications in hypnosis and NLP, natural language processing, and he bridges the gap between talent, business success, and the psychology of peak performance. And no, you're not imagining it. This is my second guest in a row named Albert. So here we go with my conversation with Albert Bramante. One of the joys of doing a podcast is that I stumble across, or am stumbled across by others, by people that I've never met, never worked with, but that we're in the same world. We have the same interests, and it's a delight to network and meet people that I would never meet otherwise. And today is one of those. I am with Dr. Albert Bramante. We'll just go by Albert the rest of the way through here. But Albert found me on a thing called Pod Pitch. He listened to a couple of my podcasts and thought that we could have an interesting conversation. And having now read his book and all about him, I don't doubt that we will. Albert, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jason, for the wonderful introduction and for inviting me on here. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. And you are coming to me today from New Jersey, though you work in the city. And I'm still down
Yes.
here in good old Sarasota. So it's a nice East Coast connection.
Yeah. Although you have better weather than we have right now, I'm sure.
All right. So I always like to start with the storyteller origin story. Now, because you have,
Okay.
this is going to be so fascinating because you have such a varied background and various expertise in various things. But did the theater bug bite you when you were young, or how did you find your way into the theater business in the first place and want to be a
So,
storyteller?
I was always interested in, I guess you could say, performing, even though I really didn't go the traditional path at all. So in high school, I was in a drama club for 3 years. And then during my undergrad, I majored in psychology for my bachelor's and master's. But I took some theater classes. I took a couple acting classes, a couple theater classes. And I just really enjoyed the process of watching stuff being made, watching stuff being produced. And And then when I graduated, with my master's, I found myself, working in social services. And right around the time of 9/11 had happened, I had volunteered for a couple different charities and social services. I was working and volunteering. And so what really happened during my volunteer experience, I started working with actors and I started working with other performers because we were doing some volunteer crisis intervention and advocacy and working with the different rescue workers after 9/11. So it became really a chance for me to get immersed into that world again. So I didn't know what I wanted. I tried acting. To be honest with you, I did that little acting thing stint, but even though it wasn't for me, I felt it was a stepping stone to where I'm at now. Because I started working with it, and it wasn't that. It was that experience where I realized I love actors.
Huh.
I love the creative elements of things. But I'm more behind the scenes guy. So I you know, after I decided, I really don't want to act anymore, but I want to really be working with actors. So I kind of pivoted. I was like, let me figure out what I want. So I volunteered at film festivals. Was part of like the inaugural Tribeca in New York, the Tribeca Film Festival.
Yeah.
When it first started, I volunteered a couple of years there. I also volunteered at a couple other local regional film festivals in New York, and I was starting to plan the entertainment, the acting panel for actors and inviting industry professionals. And I realized how much I loved again the actors. And then I started helping with casting, filmmakers cast their projects. And I started when I would make recommendations, either actors I knew from my time on set or from the film festival experiences. I was recommending actors to get roles and they were getting cast. And I said, maybe this is something naturally for me. So in 2004, I said, I want to start my own company. And I started my first little, at that time, I was a manager, a little management firm. Did that for a couple of years. And in 2007, I said, yeah, I want to go to become a licensed agent and become a talent agent. And so through that lengthy process, early 2008, I became an agent and ever since. So I've been doing it ever since. The industry has changed a lot over the years. I'd say in the past 20, 15, 20 years, it's gone through drastic changes. So, and so did I. I mean, during COVID,
Right.
started, I partnered up with, merged my firm into another one at the time. Did that for 3 years. And then right around the strikes in 23, which is the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild strike, which kind of put my business almost at a standstill.
Yeah. For sure.
I
Yeah.
just decided I want to rebrand, and then I opened up my current agency because it was a rebrand.
So, what is the name of the newly rebranded agency, Albert?
It's actually my last name, Bramante Artist.
Bramante Artists. Awesome.
Yeah,
I'm going to link that in the show note for any aspiring actors out there who are near the city.
yeah.
uh, so, you mentioned that the industry has undergone a lot of changes. So I want to stick a pin in that because I want to come back. I'll come back to that. But first, it's interesting that you were bit by the theater bug, but then you were bit by the agent bug. So you just loved actors. You were just kind of recommending them for roles, and they were getting cast, and you had that kind of light
Hmm.
go on moment of I could make a living doing this. So what?
Exactly.
Yeah, what was it like breaking into the agent world? Like you can't
It
go like
was,
for an actor you go audition, right? Or for a
yeah.
director you like do what you can then submit your resumes. But how do you audition to be an agent?
Well, you do a lot of trial by fire. For me, the typical way, and it's interesting because if I were to advise somebody today, what I would say is intern at an agency or
Mm,
or office, and then apply to be an assistant. So this way you get the hands-on experience, and then if you really want to do it, you get promoted to junior agent to agent. See, I did everything differently, which I just said I'm going to do this. Which again, if I were to go back in time, I probably would do it the method that I just suggested right now. But I just did everything kind of like on my own. I started cold. reaching out to companies, cold emailing, cold calling, and saying, "Hey, I have an agent, I have some actors. Would you be interested in taking a look?" And some were receptive, others were not.
Right.
At that time, it was kind of like an established club where you had to get in to certain circles, which took me a while to get in. I'm in a lot of the circles now, but it took me a while to get there. It's like I
Yeah.
had to prove my worth, which is understandable. So it took me a while to do that. A lot of hard work, a lot of things that go into things being an agent, and I think a lot of times when I educate actors or people that are not in the industry, is that it's not exactly always glamorous all the time. There's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of hours that have to go into this.
Hmm.
And that was sort of like probably my biggest thing, shock, you could say, going into this, is that it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
completely worth it, but it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, so demystify this a little bit for the listeners because often in pop culture, the agent is always the person who's stealing money from their clients or who's kind of conniving. That's kind of like the pop culture, like iconic
Yeah,
bad guy, the agent who's a snake oil salesman. But as an agent, you're bridging a gap between the talent and the producers, right? So you're
yeah, exactly.
facilitating that relation.
I'm a connector. Now, not to say that I don't want to go down this path, but there are fake oil agents out there. I've encountered several, but there's also a lot of great, good people out there too that really work hard for their clients. And when I say it's a little different, it's not like we're going to all the Hollywood, all the swanky things. That might be 5%. The other 95% is long hours,
Yeah.
and sometimes we have stuff to show, and sometimes we don't. It really, it really depends on the situation. So there's a lot of hard work that goes into this. A lot of hours, a lot of and the thing is, with the way an agent makes money, this is how, for listeners out there, a legitimate agent only gets money when you book.
Yes. I'm so glad you
Do
said that, Albert. I'm so
do
glad you said
not
that.
if anybody tells you that you need to pay for headshots, but now as an actor you do need headshots. That's your calling card, but it should not be from the agent. The agent does not do headshots. So if you get that, I'd say run the other way. The only way an agent makes money is when you make money. So we get 10% commission. So,
Right.
which it's definitely one of the challenging sides is doing things legitimate is the only way I'm going to do things. But at the same time, the reality of the business is that if my actors don't book, I'm not getting paid.
Right.
And I'm really working for free in the beginning.
Right.
Every time I sign an actor, that's one thing I would like actors to know. I'm working for free for you. And we're working together as a team, but at the same time, I need actors to book. So that's the only way I'm going to get paid at the end of the day.
So is there
So, mhm.
that there's got to be some kind of because I'm on the I've been staff at a theater, but I've also spent most of my life doing the freelance shuffle. Talk about the different pressures that come from that. If an actor, because actors are desperate to get booked too, but there's that balance between just cashing the check and also doing things that are artistically fulfilling, do things that will actually further your career as opposed to taking your career backwards, connecting you
Mhm.
with good with good producers as opposed to unscrupulous producers who might take advantage of you. So, talk a little bit about what you go through, because this will tie in, I'm sure, to your psychological work. What do you
Yes.
go through emotionally on behalf of your clients?
Well, as an actor, you're focused primarily on yourself getting a job, and we're on pins and needles really to get the job. I multiply that by 200, and that's like with what we do. Because it's like every actor that we get an audition for, it's like, okay, are they going to book or are they not? Or every time
Right.
we get submission. Um, and yeah, there is that balance because, yes, at the end of the day, they be paid, but I'm not going to just be throwing spaghetti against the wall and saying, okay, let's see what sticks. So I might submit for a film or a play reading service that might not yield me a bottom line or yield the actor a bottom line that's financially suitable at the moment. But if it's going to be like in a theater reading or like a 29-hour reading for theater, is that going to be a situation where you're going to be in front of producers and backers and all of that and playwrights and directors? That's going to be worth it. Even though you may only be making $300 or $400 in the entire run of the project, which for me would only be $30 or $40 commission.
Right.
To me, that the fact that you can get contacts out of this is going to be much more powerful. The same thing with a film. If I'm going to be submitting you for a film that you may only make a couple hundred out of that, but it could make it to festivals. It could go to get distribution, and then that could be even more money down the line. Or it's also about establishing relationships too, because this business is all about relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking that it's almost you're investing or you're planting and you don't know necessarily which seeds might sprout, but you have to play the long game, especially with newer clients. Or
Yeah,
younger clients, you got to play that long game.
especially those that are just out of conservatory or just out of a BFA or MFA program. Now the task here is to get them, help them become, ready in a sense to work professionally. So that's about building contacts. One thing I've kind of, my years of experience doing this is that I wish that these conservatories prepared actors a little more efficiently for the business
Hmm.
side. Talent wise, they do a great job, but it's not the business sense that or teaching the resilience or the grit that's needed to run this.
That's
Because
huge.
I've seen so many, my years of doing this is there's a high turnover rate, where actors leave the business after a couple of years, which is sad because they spent, sometimes eighty to $100,000 on a
Yeah.
conservatory program, not to, and to leave it in a couple of years, which is interesting. One sobering statistic: I went to a showcase about 10 years ago at a university. It was a BFA program, and they had 17 seniors performing, and I happened to sign one of them to my roster, and about a year or two after the showcase, we were at coffee just to kind of like talk shop, and she was telling me that out of there were 17, 14 of them had left the business in 2 years. They
Wow.
completely got other jobs outside of it and left acting behind. And I really sat scratching my head on that. I'm like, that's not a good statistic.
No.
And then I was at another showcase uh, by a prestigious MFA program, and there was a group of alumni that I must have overheard them talking. They were just out for 1 or 2 years, and I kept saying, "I don't know how much longer I can stay here. I'm going to quit." And I'm like, "It's someone said it's been 2 years. I haven't got really made it yet." And of course, I didn't want to interrupt their conversation, but I almost wanted to turn them and say, "It's only been 2 years. Only been 2 years."
Yeah.
It takes at least 10 to 20 years. If you really want to do such a career as an actor, 20, I mean, I would say at least 10, 20 years before you may see any returns.
Do you
And
think
it's,
part of the, I'm sorry, Albert. Do you think part of that is that a lot of people come out thinking they're going to be a star? Like you
mhm.
can't control like the big break. You can't control the, you're an understudy, the lead goes down, you go Shirley MacLaine style, right? You can't control whether that lottery ticket hits, but what you can control is the, I don't want to call it the grind, but the pound in the pavement. You can control. There's so many actors that we don't. You recognize their face, but you don't know their name, and that's far more typical than the
Mhm.
star, right?
Yes. And there's plenty of actors, especially like New York TV actors, that you may not know their name, but they're guest starring in every episode. It's like, oh, I know that face. And that is success for them. What you hear, there are exceptions where you could be at the right place at the right time and be discovered, but that's rare. And also sometimes you see, oh, it's a breakout role, but what they don't tell you is that they were hustling for 10, 15 years before they had the big break. They
Hmm.
were waiting tables. They were working on regional student film, regional production, and that's where I feel the training programs need to emphasize is that it's not going to be, you're not going to just come out of school and get a Broadway contract. You're not going to come out of school and be booked on a TV series or lead a movie. It can happen, but it's rare. And
Yeah.
I
For,
think a lot
yeah.
of times with these schools is there's that big fish in a little pond where it's like, okay, Well, you're in a school, you're cast in everything because you're in a program.
Hmm.
So, but when you're out in the real world, now your competition is going to be thousands more actors that are going to be just as talented, or if not even more, than you are at the moment. So, training is important, get ongoing training. And I often tell again, just when you graduate from school, your training is just beginning.
Yeah,
So,
the number of stories I've heard about that the first big break came from a teacher or a fellow student in one of these ongoing training programs, right? Or an improv troupe or something
right.
that that it's almost always you almost always break in from the side, not from the front.
Exactly, exactly. And again, it could be that, and I hate to say this, but it's true. It's who you know too. If you have a family member who's a director or a producer or um, family friend, that's going to help. That's well, someone took out the big break. Well, their uncle could have been a major director that kind of helped that along the line too.
Yeah.
So there's different exceptions, but the main thing I wish it taught us more of the resilience and more of the grit that's needed to be a not just a working artist, but a thriving artist too.
Yeah. Yeah, because also, especially, I mean, with my acting students and apprentices, I would tell them all the time, look, it's going to be so challenging, and the financial pressures will often tempt you to do things that are actually not for your benefit, right? That just you gotta pay the bills sometimes. And sometimes I get it. You have to get the insurance, then go do that role. Just your kids, your
Hmm.
wife need the insurance, whatever. Your spouse, your partner. You've got to get those weeks. Sure, there are real world realities, but man, the
Yeah,
temptation to not just quit but to compromise yourself
of
is
course,
very
and
very constant.
I understand it. So if you have family support, that's a reality, and you have to live. In an ideal world, hopefully you get either a night or a weekend job that you can survival job, or at least something flexible that you can take off.
Yeah,
At times when you need to audition or when you need to work on a contract. For
yeah,
a few months at a time. So that's in the ideal world
yeah,
in a sense. And so that's a big part of it too, is the survival mechanism
yeah.
aspect of it.
I want to go back to because it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. When you were first breaking into being an agent, was it relationships with producers that came first and you said, hey, I can find you good actors? Or was it that you had some actors first that you somehow got them to trust you and then you went and shopped them?
I
Or was it kind of both? Or,
I would say it had to be the actors a little bit first, but then it was also the producers. Kind of like then it worked well together, because obviously I needed, if I'm going to be reaching out to a producer or casting director, a lot of times these customers begin to say, okay, send me a package of people they already have on your roster. So I have to have that. And then, of course, there's a catch 22 because, well, the actors also need social proof that I can deliver.
right,
Because, again, there are a lot of snake oil salesmen out there that will promise the world and have absolutely zero connection.
yeah. Now,
And then you,
I just want to double down on what you were saying earlier too, Albert, about if an agent asks you for money up front, run away. I went to a talent audition once and they were like, ooh, nice monologue. Here's classes you can take from us. First thing out of their mouths. We want to sign you, but here's classes you got to take. Right? It was immediately that if they were trying to get money from me instead of getting money for me and taking their cut on the back end. And the number of
yes.
acting students who would email me with, would you look at this offer? And if it was ever an offer, this is for anyone out there listening. If there's ever an offer from an agent asking you for money directly, they are not an agent.
No. They're either going to get kickback, either they're going to get kickbacks. Now, I will say this: classes are important, and good headshots are important, but it shouldn't be tied in to.
Yes.
You don't want an agent who's getting the kickback from a specific photographer or a specific group of classes. So I have a list now. I do send my clients a list of suggested photographers, but they're suggested.
Right. Right.
And the same thing with classes, like good classes in New York suggested. I have no affiliation with them. I don't, you know, accept any no kickbacks, and I don't. And that's the ethical way of doing things. But that's the point. If you get someone who's pushing and saying, okay, you need to do classes with this person, this person, this person, or again, you need to get headshots from us. No, run. Um,
Yeah.
because again, it makes me wonder how are they making that? That's the only way they're going to make money. So, and especially another red flag. While it's exciting, is if they want to work with you right away.
Yeah.
Before
Oh,
that
yeah,
even
yeah, good.
because we have to be selective, and I don't. I wish I could work with more actors, but I have to be very selective because I don't make money until you make money. So I have to be fairly confident that you're going to be able to book for me, and that so I would say we get anywhere from about 60 to 100 submissions a week from actors.
Wow.
It's a lot. And I would say maybe we'll meet with a couple a week if that's from that.
Yeah, and what
Um,
is the size of your roster right now? Just to put that in
right
context.
now we're about 200, which is
So
huge.
basic,
Yeah.
almost half of your so you could turn over your roster every 2 weeks if you wanted to. You get that many
Yes.
submissions.
Yeah. Um, and that's it's amazing because there's so many good people out there that I want to work with, but I'm not able to because I don't. Obviously, I want too large of a roster. It's gonna be unmanageable for me. And also, one thing about when you reach out to anybody, actors, when you're reaching out to agents or managers, one thing to keep in mind is that of the type, because if they have a couple of people of your type already, they may not take you, and that has nothing to do with you.
Right.
It's just it's too much competition on the roster, and I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
They
want to
yeah.
have actors competing on my roster. So,
You've already got like 4 6'3", 40 something white guys. You don't need any
yeah,
more.
exactly. But that doesn't mean a year from now that might change. Because our rosters change a lot and people come and go. So it can change in a year. Or I could have somebody on a tour right now for a year that's similar type. Now I need to fill that spot again so I can hopefully. So what I would say is be very patient when you're reaching out for representation. It's not going to be, sometimes it can, but most of the time it's not. It's going to be a process. What I often think actors make two mistakes when reaching out to agents. They're not persistent enough, or they become stalkers
So-
instead.
you gotta thread the needle.
Yeah. So you want to be persistent, but not stalking.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, to your point, just kind of respectful and have that larger awareness of how the industry actually works. And just because Albert told me no right now, it's not personal. And if he gave me a good reason, I should take it. And then check back in 3 4 5. It's just understanding that you're going to have a spreadsheet full of agents that you have to kind of track what your
yeah.
conversations have been.
And that's the biggest thing too. Track everything. This is why really business sense is so important for an actor. Spreadsheets are your friend, or Google Sheets. Use that to your advantage and keep track of all the people you reach out to when you reach out to them. And then every 2 months or so, go up with something to say, like, oh, I've been doing this for the past 2 months.
Right.
So following up is great. The only thing I would not suggest following up is like, well, hey, how come you haven't called me in?
Right. Right.
Don't please, because there could be there's so many reasons
Yeah.
why I might not have. Yeah, and may not have anything to do with you personally. One rule I often say, this kind of goes into even my other training, is to not take anything personally.
It's never personal unless you make it personal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And and a lot of people tell me, oh, I wish I could go into acting, but I don't like the rejection. And I'm like, that's an issue that I also want to reframe.
Hmm.
Because if you don't take it personal, it's not rejection.
Yeah.
And they have one role to fill and hundreds of actors, so only one person can get the job. And if you take your personal feelings out of this, it's not personal.
Great. This is a perfect time to segue, I think. Although I think we should be completely transparent here, Albert, that neither you nor I have offered money to either of the other ones for this podcast interview.
Of course. Yeah.
All right, so you just started talking about reframing rejection, and I mentioned that you were Dr. Bramante, and that is a PhD in psychology. So,
Hmm.
okay, what what's going on there, Albert? Like, where did all of us? Was this after you became an agent? What spurred you to
Well, I
go get
already
a?
had my master's before I even started, so I already had that, and yeah, I've always wanted a PhD. So like, I might as well. I'm already halfway there, and I think to kind of make my parents feel better because they weren't too thrilled. I guess when wanted to say I want to be an agent and go in the entertainment industry, it wasn't exactly on their list of cards or on their
Yeah.
bingo card. My son being an agent thing, so I said, might as well get it over with, and just I'm already halfway there. So I enrolled in an online PhD program, and in the beginning, this is when I just started too. So when I just started like repping actors, the one issue I was running into, and this kind of ties in where I can tie in both fields, was I was noticing a strong disconnect from the actors I was working with. A very strong disconnect where they were telling me the words were saying one thing. They wanted to work, they wanted to audition, but yet their actions were telling me a completely different story. Every time I would get sometimes these actors who were complaining about no audition, when I would get them an audition, there was an excuse why they couldn't do it. There was,
Mm.
they had to work, they had to do this, or they, sometimes they were late to auditions, and I couldn't figure this out because I'm like, you do know that people would kill for this audition right now. They would fight for this audition, and you're not pulling over. Sometimes even no show, which I was like, I couldn't figure it out. So when I was going through my PhD program, my first year into the program, they were telling us about start planning for your thesis, the dissertation, which is the culmination, the capstone of the PhD program. And one of the advisors had hinted at us, pick a topic pick a question you want to answer.
Mm.
Okay, so all I thought about what's going on with these damn actors. Why is this happening? So I was like, I went in for my advising meeting to start planning my first year, and I just started brainstorming. And my advisor turned around and said, "That's a great project. Why are these actors self-sabotaging?" Because there was nothing at the time in the professional literature journals or anything about actors and mental health or anything. So boom, okay. So that's how that began, and that it took me a while, it took me about 10 years, but finally finished my PhD. But I studied actors pretty much, and really worked on with the actor psyche. So what I would say to reframe with rejection, going back, is don't take it personal, because when you start taking it personally, is when I started noticing that your conscientiousness and discipline starts fading,
Hmm.
and you. So what I often say is there's no such thing as rejection. It's just that your services are not needed right now.
Right.
For this
Yeah.
particular project, not going to happen. But your focus should be at the end of that audition, as soon as not now, because everything is self-tape, one of the biggest changes now because of COVID and all that. So I used to say when you walk out of that room, throw out your sides and forget it because
Mm.
that's out of your control. It's the same thing. As soon as you upload that tape, move on to the next one. You're then focused to be like, when's my next audition? So not worried about what happens because it's out of your control. It's out of your
Yeah.
control. Once it's done, it's out of your control. It's out of your hands. So let that go. And if because sometimes I have actors that are dwelling. Have you heard anything? And I laugh. I joke with my actors. I'm like, do you not think if I heard something that I would have not
Right.
communicated that with you?
Right.
Um, and a lot of times, what I guess, what which I do emphasize with actors, empathize is there's really no feedback. So like we don't really get told that many times you didn't get the role. If you don't hear anything, it's like no news is the news. Now that I can understand the frustration.
Yeah, because it just
That I
also
can
would just
empathize.
sort of snowball. It just keeps growing. But when I teach auditioning to students, I often talk about that your goal isn't to get a callback. Your goal isn't to book it. Your goal is simply to leave an impression because
Exactly.
you never know. Like I had a woman audition for me years ago. Her name was Mary, and it was literally the Albert, it was the best audition I've ever seen. It was 23 seconds. It was perfect. She showed range. She stuck the landing, had a huge laugh in the middle of it. I didn't have a role for her in the play I was auditioning. I just didn't, there was nothing that fit her. I was with four other directors. We were doing a season audition. So she
Hmm.
got callbacks for a couple other shows, but even though a brilliant audition. I had nothing for her. But a year later, I had another show I was directing. I thought of her immediately and I called her back without having her
Mhm.
go through the first round, right? So if to your point of reframing, if Mary had framed that first audition as did I get a call back? No, it's a failure, as opposed to did I leave an impression? And I may not know
Yeah,
it for a year, but heck yeah, I left an impression. That's I tell that
right.
story in every audition workshop because again, you just never know.
No, you never know. And one of the words, kind of phrases that we talk about, especially in New York, is called booking the room.
Oh, that's so good. Booking the room? I've never heard that before, but that is so good.
Because when you book the room, they're going to keep calling you back in over and over again. And in my view, as an agent, that is a major win column for an actor. If you keep getting the same casting director calling you in or the same producer calling you in, that's a big W in your corner. A
Yeah, because
big
they're looking
W.
for something. They're just looking for the right fit. They want you. They just need the right fit.
Exactly. It's not a matter of if, it's just when.
Yeah.
When will that role pop up? So that's part of it, and that's why you have to keep auditioning. And another reframe, this is why I can't remember the actor's name, but he's a working actor in New York. And one of the things he says is that when he goes in for those 2 minutes to audition, he's performing, he's having fun, he's showing the role. He doesn't look at it as an audition. He looks at it as I'm giving a chance, 2 minute opportunity, and that's it. And he goes, I love performing, so I get
Yeah.
to do what I love for 2 minutes. Doesn't matter what the outcome is.
And just
Now, I think,
you have to think energetically that reads to the room that they pick up on that.
yeah,
They
and
don't
I
pick
would
up on
imagine,
anxiety or yeah.
and I would imagine that mind shift actually increases his booking ratio. It had nothing to do with his talent. So I think all actors should really adopt that mentality. This is my 2 minutes. I'm going to be that character. I'm going to have fun with it. Yeah, still take it seriously. Still prepare, but have fun with it and just perform. You're performing for 2 minutes, and that's it. And that's why you become an actor. Perform. Use that time to perform.
Yeah.
Use those 2 minutes to perform, and that's it. Regardless of the outcome, let it go and move on, and then look for your next 2 minutes to perform.
This
So
is another reason why I always tell young actors too that don't sneer at table reads, don't sneer at staged reading series, don't sneer at new play development, don't sneer at these little 1 week contracts because they're basically just extended auditions. I got a buddy right
no,
now doing a huge workshop with a big name. I can't publicize it, but it's with a big name playwright, and it started as just one little developmental reading, but she liked him. So he stuck and he did two or three more and now he's doing the bit, and it because he had that extended audition in the room.
yeah. Well, not only that, you never know who's in the audience of these things.
Yep.
You don't know who you'll be working with that stage reading. That could you could be working, on a producer of like a Broadway show right there
It
who
reminds
sees
me of
your
that
work.
yeah, it reminds me of that story of like what Orson Welles playing Tybalt and John Houseman saw him and came up and that's how everything started for him. Oh, just without Houseman, Orson Welles doesn't become Orson Welles, but it's because Houseman saw him in a role he didn't want, but he was
Hmm.
still transfixed this guy and he still that ended up starting that whole thing. I want to go back.
Yeah,
So you studied actors. You mentioned process at the very top, that's what drew you to theater was process. And so I'm curious about the process of how do you, so your question, why do actors self-sabotage? That's your thesis question, right?
yes.
How did you study that? How do you get data?
So I when I did that, I actually put some notices out, and I had about 125 reply. And so I gave them different surveys. I gave them like a self-esteem survey. I asked them about their self-efficacy, their personality factors. I asked them about fear and success. They had about 4 or 5 different surveys that they filled out. And then I also asked them about audition frequency. And what I wanted to do was, how often you miss auditions, things like that, or how often you turn down audition. And that was kind of like my way of measuring self-sabotage. And then I measured it with all different the other variables in a sense. And what I found, the biggest thing that I found was and I talk about this in my book a bit, is the trait of neuroticism, which is a big part of the big five, personality trait. Trait of neuroticism, neuroticism means how susceptible you are to stress and anxiety. So if you score high in neuroticism, you're the type that gets stressed out easily. Now, another personality trait is conscientiousness, which is your discipline and your focus and your drive. Now, if you have a lower drive but higher anxiety level, you're more likely to be self-sabotaging as an actor. And the numbers, because I did this all statistical, not the, but that was part of the science part of it, proved to that one pattern: high neuroticism and low conscientiousness. So that was the biggest predictor of that.
I can only imagine that, Albert. So if that's the answer to the big question, why do actors self-sabotage? They're high on this one, low on this one. As an agent now, without like getting kickbacks to yourself, is this something that you coach your clients on? Like if you
Sort
notice
of.
this pattern in your clients, or do you offer this to them up front before they even start?
What I often do is I'm better able to discern now before I even take the client on. How do they behave during the meeting? How do they
Mm,
behave during the interview? What's their viewpoint about auditions? How proactive are they? They can say the right words to me, but that's, as we know, that's what didn't work the last time. The lip service is great, but I want to know what your habits are. So that's part of it too. And I think a lot of times it's, for me, it's just coaching them to not overthink, because a lot of times I'll get phone calls like from actors, oh, that audition went great, I nailed it, and then they never hear anything. A couple of times I've heard actors do the opposite. Like they were like literally in tears, I think I blew it, I didn't, this casting, I know I offended this casting director, and the next day I get a call to book the job. I'm like, yeah, you can't read that, because a lot of times you can't. That's another thing too. I was like, get out of your head when you audition.
yeah.
And I think if you're really in the zone or flow of performing, it shouldn't matter what the cast director is doing in the room. You shouldn't be noticing that, the faces, if they're not, because sometimes they do have a poker face or they're
Yeah.
just serious. But that's not because they're disdain. They're sometimes just focused, just like on you are into the role. They're focused on you as a performer, so they may not smile, they may not laugh, but that doesn't mean they're not enjoying a performance,
Yeah,
or that
that
they're
that's
not thinking in their head. They could be so deep in thought about how can you fit in this product, that they're in the flow state just like you are.
yeah.
So that's one thing I often coach actors too, is don't be focused on the facial expressions or the mannerisms of the casting director. Your focus should be on the character in your head, not in your head, but focusing on the character and delivering that. And then as soon as the audition is over, thank them and leave the room.
Yeah, get out. Get
Yeah,
out.
this is not a time to converse about your day. Even
Right.
if you know the people in the room, they're on the schedule.
Yep, respect their time. And something
Respect their
else,
time, yes.
the way I say this to my students, Albert, is that those auditors there, they're not an audience. They're working, right? They're rooting for you. They want you to
Yeah.
be perfect, but they are not going to respond like an audience, because they're not in an audience mindset. They're in a working mindset.
They're in a working mindset, and they're really in a need to fill the role. So that's what I tell actors. Like, look, even for me, I'll say, like, every time we take a client meeting, an agency client meeting, I'm looking for the next person that can book. We work. I want that. I want it to go well. And I've even heard in casting directors that tell actors point blankly, "We're on your side. We are on your side. We want you to succeed."
Yeah.
So that's, I think, should demystify the process a little bit. And I think that's a mistake that some actors make, because they put us on a pedestal too high up. And we're
Yeah.
not. We're equal. I need, cast like producers need to make their money. They need to find the next star if they want to keep their job. So they need to find the best actor for the roles. And then I would say just make their job, easy, and just
Yeah.
do your job and leave.
This is great. So your thesis then turned it, you mentioned your book, and I want to make sure we push this a bit. Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt and Mastering Self-Sabotage on the Road to Success. Now on Amazon, I do see that includes the tagline for performers, but
Yes.
I can only imagine, Albert, that this self-sabotage idea applies to way more than just theater people or actors.
Yes, and that was kind of like where I decided to work on this. In a sense, was that was that aspect. Not just a performance for anybody. Anybody deals with self doubt, self sabotage. And the reason why it's so pervasive and sneaky that we don't realize we're doing it. It's not like we're walking and saying, "Oh, I'm self-sabotaging today," and we don't realize we're doing it. It's an unconscious pattern, and that's where it takes deep reflection or somebody who's around us that can give us that tough love and say, "Hey, you're your own worst enemy."
Yeah. So, can anyone glean good things from this book, or
Yeah,
is this?
absolutely. Anybody who's ever, and we're all performing. If you think about it, whether we're doing presentations, whether we're doing sales, whether we're teaching, we're
Yeah.
all performing in some aspect, and we all have to put ourselves out there, and that's what it's kind of like all about at the end. So it's for everybody.
Fantastic. And everyone, I will put a direct link in the show notes to Rise Above the Script. Albert, this has been awesome. I want to be very cognizant of your time. So I have a wrap up that I like to do here. I like to put a spotlight on my guest. So I'll just take you through these questions here. What is your favorite story that you're currently reading or watching? As an agent, I'm guessing you probably get like heads up about projects that are in the pipeline. You like know before the curve what's going to be coming out next season, stuff like
Yeah.
that. Is well, I know you can't give away what's coming up, but is there one? Let me reframe this question for you, because what is a project that one of your clients is currently in that you are just over the moon about?
Well, I have a client that's opening a new musical called Joy the Musical, which is going to be at the Palace Theater in New York. It's a decent sized theater. I'm happy about that. 2022, I booked somebody on a Broadway 7076 contract. They did a re-imaging of the show. The show was originally with all white men, and what they did this time for this track, this Broadway track and the tour, they took women. It was women and non-binary only,
Wow.
and it was amazing. I was really, thrilled at that. And they did,
Yeah.
it was a like a 5 month Broadway run, and then they did like a year and a half tour, national tour across the country, and I was really excited and pumped about that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, here's next. If you could ask any one person any one question, who would that person be, and what would you ask them?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think for me, I would ask like, you know, some of the greatest actors of our time, like Marlon Brando, if he was possible, or Frank Sinatra, or Fred Astaire. Just what's your method, in a sense of how do you prepare for a role? Because then I could help. Because one thing I often tell other actors too is to watch the classics. Not so much watch it for the interest, but watch it for the performing aspect of it.
Back to the process thing again. That's your little.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. What is the best advice that you have ever taken?
Best advice I would ever taken is something that I needed at the time. And I would say just do it in the sense. Also put things on, get out of the idea stage and put things on paper and create a calendar. A calendar is going to be your best friend. So I was the type of person that was, I think, even living my book in a sense. Because for many years, I kept saying, I want to write a book, I want to write a book, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to write a book. And then I heard a statistic that was sobering, that really kind of woke me up, was that 1% of people who say they want to write a book only write a book. The other 99% never write a book, even though they say they do. And I was easily becoming that 99%, very easily, because I kept saying I want to write it. I just haven't had time yet. So finally, I was at one of my, because I go for coaching too. So one of my coaches had said, put it in the calendar. So when we're going through a group session, it was like, okay, you want to write this book. When will the first chapter be written? Give me a date. And when you do stuff like that, anywhere, whether it's I want to do this, I want to produce this, I want to start a podcast. When, not if, when. And when you put it on the calendar, now you may not meet all the time that date, that specific goal, but at least you got working. Because when I started doing that, I said, okay, for 2 hours a night, I'm going to write. And for about after 2 months or so, I had my manuscript done.
Yeah.
And then it was ready for editing. But had I not did that, I probably would be still sitting in 2025 saying I want to write a book.
Right.
So the best piece of advice I would say is, create actions, not thoughts. Put it on the calendar. Again, try to stick to it, but, at least get something done so that you partially met it.
Yeah.
So I want to write this, or I want this article, I want to do this, but okay, so by when? When, and that gives you accountability.
Yeah. It's the magic of the deadline, right? And if it's not an
Yeah,
externally created deadline, you have to create it for yourself.
you have to absolutely.
Oh, Albert, this has been great. And we didn't even talk about your stuff with hypnosis and NLP. That'll be next time.
Yeah,
uh,
definitely. But you can always, if you have any questions, go to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to
speaking
answer
of
anything.
which, speaking of which, how can listeners find out more about you and your book and your social media or your agency? Where should people go
Yeah,
to learn
so
more about Albert Bramante?
you can go to BramanteArtist.com. You can reach out to me there. You can also LinkedIn, Albert Bramante, LinkedIn. Instagram, I'm at Dr. Al Bramante. Feel free to reach out, DM me. I'm happy to, chat. And yeah, I hope to hear from some of you.
Awesome. Yeah, and everybody, again, I'll put all that stuff, direct links right in the show notes, along with his book, Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt and Mastering Self-Sabotage on the Road to Success. For anyone. For anyone.
Yeah.
Oh, Albert, thank you so much for reaching out, and what a great conversation. Appreciate your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Jason. I'm really happy to be here.
You've been listening to the Page and Stage podcast. All my thanks to this week's guest and to all of you out there for listening. If you enjoyed or found value in this podcast, I ask that you share it with at least one other person. Word of mouth has always been and will always be the best marketing tool in the world. I use an incredible online app, Riverside.fm, to produce this podcast. If you are interested in producing your own podcast or other audio or video content, I cannot recommend them highly enough. I've left a link for you in the show notes so you can check them out for yourself. The show notes are also where you can learn more about all my guests and access their websites and projects. I use Substack as my primary publishing platform over at pageandstage.art. The Page and Stage podcast is only one part of my story coaching work. You can check out everything I'm up to over at pageandstage.art, including my other podcast, a storytelling resources page, my own books and plays, my one-on-one coaching, as well as my weekly newsletter full of tips, tricks, inspiration, and encouragement for storytellers of all stripes. You can sign up for free over at pageandstage.art. Thank you again for listening. And until next time, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.